Good evening, folks. It's Diamond with the Oppenheimer Ranch Project, Shinrin Yoku, and Magnetic Reversal News, bringing you a grand solar minimum update Thursday, September 24th, around 11:30 p.m. Mountain Time 2020. The Alps showing heavy snow for the final week of September, as well as the U.S. and Canada. Snow will be moving across. Well, it has begun. But the big story, for the first time in 18 days, no tropical cyclones are spinning over the Atlantic. But the Atlantic hurricane season is not over, kids. Keep calm. It's boom time. Up to 3,000 deaths linked to poor air quality from wildfire smoke. That may be more than COVID. A new analysis in the California wildfires suggests that between 1,200 and 3,000 people have died from poor air quality caused by wildfire smoke between August 1st and September 10th. Now, the flames across the state have reportedly taken at least 26 lives from burning, but 3,000 lives from breathing? When smoke is factored in as a wildfire-related death, the toll jumps 50 times higher, insiders reported. The analysis was released by researchers at Stanford University, and these are hidden deaths, according to Marshall Burke, just like COVID-19. These people who are probably already sick, but for whom air pollution made them sicker. I wonder where I heard that before. Now, tracking the coronavirus in California, well, 90 deaths today. That's about the same as people that have had heart attacks. So there's that. Did you hear about the cool down? October to begin with widespread Arctic outbreak across the Midwest. And look at that. Montana is on its side. Holy macaroni. Boom! There we go. Take a look. Now we're talking about the meridional flow here and the breakdown of the jet stream, which is predicted. We predicted this 3 years ago to start occurring now as we descend into the grand solar minimum with the weakening magnetosphere, and at solar minimum, the weakest solar cycle in over 100 years, followed by cycle 25, which will be the weakest cycle in over 120 years, potentially. We have a breakdown in the jet stream towards meridional, where we bring Arctic air all the way to the tropics, tropical air all the way up to the Arctic, and things get, well, difficult to grow food and other things. AccuWeather forecasters say a massive shift in the weather pattern is on the way for North America next week. Summer-like heat is expected to build over the western U.S. as a surge of Arctic air is projected to plunge into the eastern half of the nation. Both high and low temperature records will be broken next week. It will be epic. An outbreak of the coldest air since last spring will sweep across much of the plains, Midwest, and parts of the interior South next week. The change in the pattern will come in two waves, said AccuWeather long-range meteorologist Tyler Royce. After a warm-up during the second half of this week, an area of low pressure sweeping across southern Canada will usher in the initial cool down. The first wave of cooler air will settle over the northern plains and the Great Lakes this weekend, and then will filter into the northeast early next week. The countdown will be preceded by a substantial warm-up with widespread highs in the 80s this week as records are broken. The first push of cooler air will serve to bring temperatures back to near normal or a little below normal for late September, and will be limited to the northern areas across the southeast. Temperatures will remain a few degrees above normal, but then boom! Late next week, the core of the cold moves in. Frost and freezes are likely for most of the upper Midwest. Record lows will be challenged. 10 to 15 degrees below normal for Minneapolis, Kansas City, St. Louis, Chicago, Detroit, Pittsburgh, Cincinnati, and waterspouts on the Great Lakes are possible. A second wave of cool air will follow, and it will be much more dramatic and longer lasting than the first. And that's what we'll be reporting on next week. What a tweak. 11 feet of snow expected on an American mountain this week? Are you kidding me? Mount Baker in Washington's Cascade Range. Now, local forecasters in the region, the National Weather Service is saying that Washington's Mount Baker, located above Mount Baker ski area, could get 132 inches of snow through Saturday, which in our town is Saturday, so that's great news here. But if I'm up there, the first week of fall and you're going to get 11 feet of snow, 12 feet potentially. As the season's first atmospheric river event approaches, many are wondering whether other regions will be impacted with snow. But I'm wondering if they'll actually get 12 feet of snow over there at Mount Baker. That would be ridiculous. The GFS model is just showing, well, just a few feet on the model, as well as areas in Montana, Idaho, and Wyoming. But Canada, well, they're the big winner through the first week of October. Take a look. Holy macaroni. And these totals are in inches, not in centimeters. They happen to be in centimeters when we come over to Europe, but 100 centimeters is in meter. Here we have 70 centimeters in the Alps. Well, it's going to be epic, to say the least, because this is all happening right here. This weekend, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. That'll be your fun day in the Alps, and I can't wait to be making the podcast as it happens. Now, no quakes of note, so that's good, but as far as volcanoes are concerned, we had that Sangay eruption, and now we have Lopevi volcano, which is in Vanuatu. Now, Lopevi has increased seismic activity. According to Vanuatu Meteorology and Geohazards Department, the seismic activity continues at extremely high levels associated with increased continuous seismic unrest, which is indicative of large amounts of magma moving in the subsurface. Now, the activity is also producing emissions of steam and continues to be observed at the active crater. Now, Lopevi has some interesting history, which is why we're talking about it right now. It is not one of the more dangerous volcanoes that's going to block out the sun. It is only violent to VEI-3 in his recorded history. Back in 1864, June 9th, VEI-3, a VEI-3 here in 1967. And then just 1 month before Mount St. Helens, back in 1980, a confirmed VEI-3 blowing off the summit. Now that's quite telling. Is this a pre-warning of Cascadia activity happening, potentially? It's anyone's guess, but I just wanted to make the correlation there for you. Mount St. Helens erupted 4 weeks after this volcano in Vanuatu called Lopevi. I'm probably saying it wrong, but that's fine. So Lopevi is increased unrest, which means we might be seeing some increased unrest in those Cascadia volcanoes, in my opinion. Now, climate scientists uncover a new record low temperature, all time, right at the heat of global warming. Yes, and the date was December 22nd, 1991, when the lowest temperature ever recorded in the Northern Hemisphere occurred, and that was in Greenland, making Greenland colder than Mars. And the coldest Northern Hemisphere temperature is confirmed 3 decades later. Why it takes that long is anyone's guess. But it proves that during the midst and the peak of global warming, the coldest temperature ever recorded was recorded, which makes absolutely no sense. So anyone that's on the fence just from this piece of data should be like, this is called scratching your head. Nearly 30 years after recording the temperature of minus 93.2 degrees Fahrenheit or minus 69.6 Celsius, crushing the previous record by a large margin, like a third of a degree C. The measurement has been verified by the WOM, the World Meteorological Organization, the WMO, as the coldest record temperature ever on the Northern Hemisphere. So, opposite. Everything's opposite. We know that. Earth's magnetic field can reverse poles ridiculously quickly. Well, I think I did a report on this at Magnetic Reversal News about a year ago, but we're going to rehash it. And up until just recently, everyone had been claiming, all scientists have been claiming that magnetic reversals take thousands of years. The last magnetic reversal is 780,000 years ago. You guys are idiots. But the facts are in. In the last decade, there have been hundreds of peer-reviewed papers showing magnetic excursions which approach reversal, but not actual reversals. The poles come to the equator and they snap back. To the equator and they snap back. During that time they come to the equator, the magnetosphere weakens to less than 10%. I mean, anything living on the surface of the planet at that time is going to be irradiated and fried. It's going to be very difficult going. So, now that we know that, and we know that polarity reversals are not the norm, but excursions are, we're living the next excursion. It started happening 100 years ago, and it's been accelerating the last 2 decades. What this paper concludes, and they analyzed a 16,000-year geomagnetic history of a stalactite, which has very high resolution. If you cut it laterally and you go through all the dissolution members, you can literally take samples, mass spectroscopy, and get amazing proxy data on the atmosphere, the temperature, all kinds of things. So what they found was a 100,000-year-old speleothem from a cave, and the speleothem that they were studying ranged about 20,000 years. Let me get the actual dates. Yeah, from 91,000 to 107,000 years ago was this stalactite. And they cut it, and they did cross-sections, and what they found within that was magnetic grains that they could align, almost like you were breakdancing. And the team determined some amazing things. Now, this is a cutting-edge paper, because what it determined was that the Earth's magnetic poles could literally shift within 100 years. The team found that Earth's magnetic polarity shifted several times during that 16,000-year period that they studied in the speleothem, which was no surprise to them. The shock emerged about 98,000 years ago, right in the middle of the stalactite, when a huge shift in polarity occurred in a period of less than 200 years, possibly 100. That's how small the data set is. In 100 years, you only get like a millimeter of growth on a stalactite. So that's why their mind was blown. They're like, from here to there, it's totally snapped. And that's what we're experiencing. So be ready for the snap, kids, because it's accelerating. Like, whoa. The sun's increasing solar flares could cause major problems. Now, as we enter solar cycle 25, which just happened, big solar activity, we just went into a 3-hour geomagnetic storm, the first of solar cycle 25, I think. And then we have a coronal hole facing us. So as we enter cycle 25, there is going to be flares. There always is. There's an average of 1 X flare every year, even at these grand minima periods. The last X flare was back in, I want to say 2017, 18. The one that took out John Casey, gave him the stroke, which is why we report on geomagnetic effects in human health, because people in our community have been affected by strokes, including John Casey and Dave Talbot from Electric Universe, both having strokes during high KP events, proving what we were simply telling you from the years prior, unfortunately. Now, the sun's increasing solar flares could cause major problems. This is now entering the mainstream. This is the 3rd major piece in the last month on the topic. So clearly, they're now feeding us information to maybe give us a little hint of things to come. Now, we've been telling you for the last 4 years about this. As we weaken the magnetosphere and solar flaring, normal flaring occurs, we're going to be seeing some major perturbations to the grid. We're talking localized blackouts, even major blackouts if we have a major solar flare that will affect that portion of the Earth when it hits. So it won't be global, but it will be regional, it'll be long-term, and people will suffer. So get prepared. Portland mayor realizes defunding the police was a mistake. Can you... Well, duh. Now let's talk about more does. The COVID-19 pandemic, which is not a pandemic, by the way. It's simply a novel virus which barely affects anyone. And as they race for this fake vaccine that no one actually needs because almost no one's at risk, more and more information like this is coming out, which will give us more therapies for actually the at-risk communities, which are the above 75 people. Anyone that's above 75 is at a higher risk of dying from this novel virus, but just like they are from the flu. Now, what they're finding is it's restricted to men older than 75 and those with certain sets of conditions. And what happens is a flawed interferon response, which kills the patient. And if we could simply be administering interferon in these elderly people or the higher at risk people, it might prevent this flawed interferon response. So what I'm suggesting is we're going to have therapies that are way safer and more effective than an untested RNA replicase vaccine, which needs to be kept at minus 80 degrees C and won't help anyone, but will cause you to get early MS and your spinal cord to swell. So there's that. And did you know that more COVID cases among distance learners than those attending at school in person are happening right now? Very few people are picking up on this. But it's the people that are stuck at home that have to watch on the computer that are getting the virus, not the ones that are showing up in person. And you know what's even more telling? That the CDC just updated its infection fatality ratio if infected with COVID-19. And it shows that the people of school age, 0 to 19, have a fatality ratio of 0.00003. That is 100,000, 10,000, 100,000. You have 0.3 millionths of a percent chance of a fatal infection if you're school age. It's almost the safest disease ever for children or anyone under the age of 20. 0.002% fatality ratio for 20 to 49, which is equivalent to texting and walking in front of a bus. And for 50 to 69, 0.005, which suicide is higher. So why the country is locked down, why we have face mask mandates, and why all this nonsense to control the population is going on is anyone's guess, based on this information right here. If you're a critical thinker and you go search all the diseases in history, none of them are this safe. None of them. But COVID-19 has ended the world that you live in. You're now in the new normal for these kind of numbers. 0.00003% fatality rate from 0 to 19. We probably got our channel shut down for just telling you that information, which came from the cdc.gov, by the way. Now, have you ever heard of Duncan Socrates Lemp, who was murdered from a no-knock warrant by police March 12th of this year? None of the officers were charged. They all retired. Nothing has happened. In fact, Duncan Lemp was sleeping when they murdered him. None of the people in the home where the no-knock warrant was being issued were even had a criminal history. So these are they're just citizens with no criminal history that get murdered by police. Nothing happened. There were no riots. There was no outrage. The family barely raised $17,000 for the funeral expenses using a crowdfunding site where Breonna Taylor, same situation, gets $12 million settlement, and they burn down the city of Louisville, and they murder cops. This is the world you're living in, where disinformation is king, and Black Lives Matter, but Duncan Socrates Lemp's life doesn't. It's disgusting. Now, according to his lawyer, he was killed by officers while he was sleeping. You read the reports. And now the feds are just picking it up now to do an investigation. You know why? Because there are no riots. There are no cops being murdered for Mr. Lemp. So there's definitely a problem with the mainstream media and what they have done to our country. And a lot of you are out there are like trying to, fight the government. The easiest target currently is the mainstream media. And so I don't know why we're not rallying in front of those places, because they're all on main streets, and sticking information like this down their necks. Because mainstream media is owned by the 6 multinational corporations which are controlling this narrative. And they're reporting it to the world. And if we can get this information out to the masses, because they have to pick it up, well, then they have to put it down. Proper prior planning prevents piss poor performance when disinformation is key. And as of now, the CIA now knows that everything you know is incorrect. Share this with like-minded people. Subscribe to the channel, even though we're demonetized. And be safe. We love you. That's a boom.